Hello, ho, ho, ho. It's that time of year. It's Christmas time. And if you're watching this before Christmas, happy Christmas. And if you're watching it after Christmas, still happy Christmas. It's me, Martin Cross, in Crossy's Corner. And we have the amazing Camilla Hadland Horrocks.
Hello. So glad to be here for the Christmas Crossy's Corner. Is that what we're calling it? Chris Crossy Corner, Christmas Crossy.
It is, and we're going to do a review of the year. I was kind of looking to see how many reviews of the year. I think World Rowing did their sort of thing about cruise of the year and so on. I haven't seen the Row Show hasn't put their podcast with their awards of the year up yet. I'm sure that'll be coming up soon. But I thought it would be great just to look back. Pre-Olympic season, pretty important season. And just take a look back and reflect on how things were. Have you got an overview of how this season was?
Yeah, I think in an Olympic and Paralympic qualifying year, that intensity just kind of notches up a little bit, and I think a lot of the results played out maybe as we'd sort of anticipated them to, especially from the 2022 season. I think a lot of those results that we were expecting, I think maybe we were on here in 22 Crossy talking about how strong the Dutch were going to be, right, come qualifying and come the Paris Olympics, and I think that rang true. So I think that was a sort of overwhelming tick in the box, but a few surprises, and I'm sure we'll come on to those. And I think another great thing is the addition, like the news about the beach sprints going into LA. I think that was another piece of news that we got this year. And having been at the Coastals, I know everyone very excited about the prospect of the next Olympiad for that. So I thought a lot went to plan, I think, for a lot of people. Those boats qualified for Paris, but a couple of surprises which I'm sure we'll talk about.
When I look back at the season, I mean, there are things that I reflect on. I'm not sure whether I should look at the positive. I mean, I think we had a great European Championships. I think the Worlds on the last 2 days were great. The crosswind was a real issue, I think, although they did their best to get around it. For me, the season was disappointing in the entries for the first World Cup in Zagreb. It was such a shame. You had a great regatta course, really good organisation, and there were events. There were no men's eights, no women's eights, and I think the thing about women's eights too, there were the numbers of women's eights were very low, and I kind of understand it, I suppose, but not really.
I can't help but agree with you about the first World Cup there, actually. Like, coming on to that point, I thought Zagreb was amazing. I went this year for the first time ever, and I thought it was a great course. I thought the atmosphere was amazing with the Sinkovics getting that 50th international medal. Like, the crowds were huge. They're obviously a huge deal in their home country in Croatia, so there was a lot of noise around it, and it was a shame that not more people were there to experience that. But and I fear, unfortunately, that next year is going to be even more so, right, for that first World Cup in 2024, because in reality, when you've got, you're staring down the barrel of an Olympic and Paralympic Games, I think really it's maybe just World Cup 2 that's going to be the big focus for a lot of programs, and I don't really see where World Cup 3, the Europeans, World Cup 1 are going to fit into that for the best, that best race delivery when it comes to being on the course in Paris in July or in September.
So I think you compared beautifully the World Rowing Awards with Pete O'Hanlon, and it there were crews of the year. I think the way they do it. So I'm just wondering, how happy we are with those crew. If we said, okay, what are the crews of the year for us? Whether we'd match World Rowing's crews of the year.
Yeah, it's always such a hard decision, isn't it? Because I feel like there are many crews that could pitch for it. And even things like, again, the Thomas Keller medal that we'll come on to, I feel like the quality every year you look at the list and go, oh my word, how are they ever going to choose someone from this very accomplished list? And I think crews of the year, there were so many crews that either went unbeaten for the season or had multiple runs of years where they had maybe won a World Rowing Award in the past a few years where they couldn't go up for nomination again, right? Where actually, arguably, would you say that like the Romanian women's double, who were winners last year, should be up there featuring in those top crews of the year? So
that's what.
Yeah, it's difficult because you need to strike that balance between somebody not winning every year, but they're so impressive. But yeah, I think if we were to look at, for me, like the women's crew of the year, undoubtedly, I think it was well deserved by the Brits in that women's double. They've just had a phenomenal season, and to set the only world best time outside of the para categories. I think that sort of like really established them as being favourites for that award. So for me, I think that was a really good choice. When it comes to things like the men's crew of the year, did Ollie have the perfect season? Probably not. He didn't win at the Europeans, right? And yes, he completed the treble with the World Cup hat trick, and won the World Championships, which arguably is the most important thing. But he didn't quite notch up that perfect season that the women's crew of the year did. So yeah, I guess there's room for argument there.
Yeah. I kind of off the top of my head, I think Tweller and Bräunig being so dominant that the Sinkoviches decide to change their event. I mean, it will be interesting if you. I'm sure that I haven't got the percentage times of the World Championships in front of me, but if you ask the coaches who was the fastest crew, who do you think's the top crew? Some of them would probably say the Dutch men's double.
Yeah, and it was such an impressive margin to come back into that event. And again, like they barely spent time in that double, right? They were all in different crew combinations ahead of the worlds. And like Simon, who was in the single, had spent time in that quad on the run up to, and various other people. So the fact that had spent time sort of in that double single quad, roundabout that they were sort of conducting through the World Cups and through the Europeans. So the fact that they could jump into that double and make it move as well as it did, with not too much establishment, I guess, with a year to go, they're stunning, aren't they? Like as a combination, absolutely electric.
I think if you get, like football, and I know we're not football, but
I certainly am. I'm not football. Don't ask me football.
No. But say, for example, they have the Ballon d'Or. Who's the best player in the world, and Messi's won it lots of times. But you wouldn't have football saying, "Oh, Messi won it last year, so we can't have him nominated this year," like the Romanian women, for example. And I just think if you're trying to build up, superstars or media presence, I think you have to have a regularity of names occurring. And I know Bodnar and I don't think even in Romania they're big. I mean, I talked to a Romanian lady yesterday, and I don't think she'd ever heard of rowing actually. Which I was kind of vaguely surprised at. So I'm not sure how big personalities they are in Romania, but like you say, that they're unbeaten, aren't they? For
what, 3 years now, since 20? Well, no more than that, maybe 2019. I think was the last time that they sort of were beaten. Maybe 2019, could be wrong. A huge run of events. And actually, one of the points I was going to bring to this, and like I've been thinking all afternoon about like who have been my impressive squads, crews, whatever. The Romanian women, actually coming to think about it today, like taking the double but also the rest of the squad, I hadn't realized quite how many crews they'd qualified for the Olympic Games. Like they missed one event, and it was the women's single on the women's side, and that was just because they obviously hadn't prioritized that. But every other category, Romania have qualified about for the women in the Olympics for Paris, which is just astounding, more than any other nation on the women's side, I think.
Yeah, so they won the women's 8, they won the women's double. They got silver in the women's 4, did they?
Yeah, silver and in the pair.
And
Did they
in
get
the
silver in the
pair,
pair as well?
yeah, they probably got bronze in the pair, did they? Behind the Dutch and the Australians.
And the Australians, yeah, you're right. You are right. I knew they were on the podium.
Yeah, which is phenomenal, I think, for the Romanian squad.
And the quad finishing in the A final, which again just shows you that depth. Like, I hadn't even realised the quad had got a qualifying spot, but they had. Like, absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I think Para Crew of the Year, did they get that right? The Australian PR3 mixed double.
Yeah, look, again, I think this is where we come to that argument, right, that you've just raised, is do you go for the crews that are winning year after year? Because I think everyone else on the slate had won it at least once before in some capacity. Not sure about Lauren and Greg as a combination, from the GBR PR2 mixed double, but certainly Birgit and Roman, both have won it in the past, and both have had amazing, runs in their own events, dominance, perhaps you could call it. I think as a new event, it's great to have, I think great to bring their names to the fore in something that is a new event for Paris next year, and to set, a world best time in a new category. Like, there weren't that many world best times set this year, and so to have that, I think it sort of elevates you that little bit more, right? So I appreciate it's a new event from people prioritizing it, so I think that does play into the fact it's maybe not easier to get a world best time. Of course, everyone's sort of prioritizing it, and so there's a bar that gets higher and higher. But I think in the first few years of its development, I think we'll see that world best time come down and down. But I think it's great for the Aussies, and I think it was a great choice.
Yeah, I liked the race that the British PR2 mixed double had. Was it against the Chinese?
Yeah, an amazing race, right? Right down to the final few strokes, that was in the balance, and it was a great one to watch. I actually went and watched it back afterwards because I was at the 1,000 meters, so you never get to see the finish, but I'd heard what a great race it was, and I think great to have that bit of competition to spur the training on for the next, less than 12 months now, right?
Yeah. We were talking there about great races. I mean, interestingly, I think there probably weren't so many great races. I think there were 1 or 2 at the Worlds, maybe 3 or 4 actually, and there were more earlier in the season.
Yeah, Lucerne for me kind of stands out as somewhere where we had a lot of good races at World Cup 3. I think there was a lot of competition. Not only the women's 8 stands out, that amazing race between the British, the Canadians, the Australians. That was awesome. Really, really cool race. And I think we had some great races in the singles and the pairs as well across both sides. So, Lucerne, I think, always delivers when people are sort of peaking for that World Cup to go up against the rest of the world. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to think back to the Worlds, and again, it's difficult, right? When you don't see the finish. The women's quad stands out for me between the Dutch and the British. That was a great race, but I don't know if there's any others that you can kind of pluck out.
I think there were races that weren't necessarily close that were epic. I think the men's singles was an epic race in the competition and the way that it was run. I think the men's pairs, in the end, that wasn't close, but that was in Belgrade. But that was a pretty epic race.
And a pretty epic category, right? Throughout the season, like there was always this sort of tension, I guess, between the Brits and the Swiss. And then you added the Irish into the mix as well. And now we're going to have to account for the Croatians too. Like, I think that's going to be an amazing category coming into next year, right? I'm fascinated to see how that develops. Another one that stands out for me from the Worlds, actually, I've just thought is the B final of the lightweight women's doubles, right? Like that was easy, like with no medals on the line, the best race of the entire regatta, certainly for me. And to see the Irish come away with that was just phenomenal.
Did they put the French out?
Yeah, French and the Italians,
Yeah,
both
and the Italians
from Tokyo, and the Greeks, I think, were in the B final as well. Who we, before we came on air, we were talking about the Greeks being such a young crew, and I'm sure we'll see them back at like I don't know whether they'll be eligible for the European qualification regatta. I don't know if they've qualified too many boats, but they will certainly be at FAQR.
Yeah. To me, I think there were a series of incredible races at the Europeans. And I would pick out 3 races as being like, wow, really exciting. And that was, one was the women's doubles, where the Lithuanians really took the race to the Romanians. And for a lot of the way down the course, it looked like the Romanians were going to get beaten for the first time since 2019. And I don't think that the Romanians were sculling that well. I don't think they've been in the boat that long before, but it certainly made for a great race.
Yeah, I think there was some illness, maybe. I don't know whether it was Simona or and Kuta, but one of them had been ill on the run up, and there was a little bit of chopping and changing, and there was unsure whether she would even race. I think whichever one it was that was ill, and I can't remember now. But it did cause for some great racing, and I think when you've got that unbeaten streak, it's like in anything, right? Like when anyone's on a bit of a run, unbeaten, for that, like, potential gap, that little sort of spot of light that the Lithuanians saw to end that reign, and really went for it. It made for just that little bit more than just a close race. It also kind of hung other things in the balance.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to watch. And in an event in a location like Bled, I've been to Bled before. I thought, as a stage for the racing, and let's put aside that some of the athletes had maybe some interesting feedback about the way that the water was for most of the course. If we put that to one side, it was just a phenomenal kind of stage, right? Like a setting for a showdown like that. It's what an arena, right? I loved Bled. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, and then on Lake Bled, the men's 8s between Britain and Romania.
I thought you might have said that one. That was separated by like this much.
Yeah.
And with the coxing substitution, right? Was that race where Henry Fieldman jumped in for Harry Brightmore? Was that the same one?
Well remembered. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, it was.
So I think that made it an even cooler story, right? You have a last minute sub, and to be in a race that close and keep your composure to come away with a win by such a fine margin. Really cool.
And then I thought also, I kind of was expecting, I don't know whether it's because I know them and like them, Ollie Wynne-Griffith and Tom George, the British pair. I kind of thought, right, they messed up the final of the Worlds last year in 22. So I thought they're going to come back guns blazing. And I think that was their first race. It was the first race for the British team, the Europeans. And I thought that they're just going to do this. And yet, the Spanish were in there, the Swiss were in there. And it came down to a shootout in the last part of the race. And the Swiss, despite catching that crab at about 400 meters, I think Gulic caught a crab, the Swiss just got through and beat the British.
And held that form all the way through to the Worlds, right? It wasn't just a flash in the pan for the Europeans. It was, it was a continued development of that boat all the way through to the Worlds. And it was an amazing race. I think all 3 crews on the podium were separated by less than a second. It was like they were all 6:22 something in that final, right? All 3 medalists. So just goes to show you how great a race it was. But I think with the British, right, they sort of maybe didn't come away with the result they wanted in 22 at the Worlds in Rachitse, but came back and have stepped on enough to consistently beat the Spanish, who beat them to that silver medal in Rachitse, and then ultimately who got the gold in Rachitse that I'm forgetting now?
Well, it wasn't the Swiss, was it? It was the Romanians,
The Romanians,
yeah.
Kosmiak and So they've done enough to step on to beat both the Romanians and the Spanish consistently, but yet hadn't accounted for that new crew coming in from Switzerland, who, for me, I think when the crews came out for men's crew of the year, if we look at it from a slightly different perspective of not who's won everything, but who's really surprised us and come onto the stage and impressed, I think arguably the Swiss men's pair of Roman and Andrin are an amazing candidate for crew of the year, right? Like, they've just come from nowhere. They've found that combination that works. They've stepped in and won both a European and world gold medal. Yes, they didn't win every race of the season. They didn't attend every race of the season, but for me, they won the two races that counted the most on the run up to an Olympic Games first year in the crew. Like, how amazing is that for Switzerland, and from a small nation as well?
It's interesting because like Ollie Zeidler, the Swiss went to World Cup 1, thank goodness, and won there. And they went to Varese and got beaten by the British there. It was a great race. And then they went to Lucerne and came in third behind Romania and Britain. And then they went to the Worlds. And I asked Gulick about this when I talked to him, and he said, "Oh, we don't race enough. You know, we've got to race a lot." And I really liked that attitude. The other thing which I heard, and I don't know if it's true, was that their coach Ian Wright was perhaps, you know, thinking maybe a medal this year and aiming for the win in the Olympics. So a gold was like a bonus.
And I mean, how motivating is that going to be for them? You know, stepping on for the next, wow, how many months are we on now? 6-7 months. It's crazy when you say it like that, right? 6-7 months until the Olympic Games. And I think it just goes to show, if we look back to 3 years ago from Tokyo, not quite 4, like the Danish, right, are a really good example of where when you find it in a small boat and it just clicks, and you, like Sutton and Vistaval, who like seemingly came out of nowhere, having come through the FOQR, come away with a medal on the podium. Like, I think those small boats give real opportunities for contenders to, you know, step up and be a hero and do it when it counts, because they can make improvements quickly. You know, you just find that gel, and there's vast improvements to be made when it's just two of you, versus, you know, trying to find those small margins in an 8 maybe don't come quite as quickly, but in the pair, like, you find something gels that little bit quicker, and you can advance, you know, beyond the point of what you were expecting. And maybe that's what Ian Wright was saying, right, is like there's still heaps to go, and that's why they weren't expecting it at the time they did.
So I've got 2 more races. I think I've chosen my race of the year. So my second best race, better than any of the ones in the Europeans, was the lightweight men's doubles at Lucerne.
Ooh. And now I'm trying to think about, tell me more, Crossy. Remind me again. I was in the finish tower, and I can't even remember it here. So,
well, what happened was the Irish did their normal thing off the start and were at the back, and then they came through in the second 500, and I think the French were leading, and then the Irish basically in the third 500 did their normal thing. And got up to the leading French, and then they went away. They went away from the Irish. The Irish went away from the French in the last 500, and then with 250 to go, it was like, are the French coming back?
Yes, I remember this now, and because actually you saying this has triggered my memory about the French missing out on Paris qualification in a boat that they just won gold in at Lucerne. Which is usually, like, you know, I remember speaking, I think it was Greg actually, Searle, about this, who was saying that he had never been to Lucerne and then gotten a worse result at the Worlds. He was like, if you can perform at Lucerne, where you've been in a big training block and you're really tired, and come away with a great result, you're, you know, more often than not, a lot of the time, you're never going to perform worse at the World Championships. Well, I think that French crew, the lightweight double there, sort of flipped the script on that a little bit, and that's why that was so shocking and surprising, right? Is that if you can beat the French, beat the Irish in a race like that, then yeah, it's certainly a bit shocking. But like you said, I think there was maybe conditions to play, and I think we're getting a few comments. Hi Manuel, nice to see you. That the conditions maybe had somewhat to play in the results from the Worlds, but you know, there were adaptations made with the lane seedings, but you got to do it. You got to do it regardless, right? That's the
so my race of the year is probably the men's singles at the Europeans.
Oh yes, great shout, really good.
And I think it was because I remember doing commentary with Greg, and we were looking at Ollie and just thinking he's just going to go now. He's going to go now. And Tuskos was right up there, which was great to see because he was off the pace in the World's final in Rachice. And then this lad Van Leeuwen, who I didn't really pay that much attention to, I'm sorry to say, in terms of the earlier rounds. You know, the Dutch have got Leeuwen in the single, and then the Dutch guy just seizing his chance in the last 500, and then Tuskus getting through Zeidler, and then I think the other scullers, I think Nielsen was quite close in fourth, and Vasiliev, the Bulgarian, I think, and then the young Lithuanian, I can't remember his name, but I think there was like about 5 seconds or something between all 6 scullers. And the joy with which Van Leeuwen's win was received by the massive Dutch team there was phenomenal.
I have these memories, and again, I could hear it. Again, I was on a boat at the 1,000-meter markers, so miles away from where the outcome happens. And other than hearing the result in my headphones, you know, you don't see as a commentator out on the course the bits of the course that you're not on, and that's often the finish where the tower announcer, who in this case was Pete, gets that last 250. But even from where I was, 1,000 meters from the line, I could hear Lenny, 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 as they were like chanting him coming into the podium. It was just, I think it was a bit of a fairy tale for everyone, right? He came from an outside lane. I want to say he was in closest to me, so I don't know if that's 1 or 6. I think probably 6, right? And I think that when you've got characters like Zeidler, Nielsen, Duskos, who always seems to perform well at a European Championships, and you've got to remember for these smaller nations like Greece, there's a lot riding on the Europeans in terms of things like funding, and you know, future state of what rowing looks like in that country. A lot of that comes from the Europeans for countries like Greece. So you always expect good performances. And again, we talked about the state of the water about 10 minutes ago, right? In Bled, it did not favor people who are not competent in the sort of washing machine that is Lake Bled. So I think maybe the writing was on the wall that Zeidler maybe, you know, was not favored, but he's been getting better and better and practicing in those tough conditions. So you're like, oh, maybe he could, and maybe he's been working on it. But to see someone like, you know, come out of nowhere, like Lenny Van Leeuwen from lane 6 and motor through, seized his opportunity and sort of just kept going, right? He just never died down. I think he blasted off the start, and then just we were going, oh, he's going to die soon. He's going to die soon. Like, he's up here with the leaders, and then just kept going, stepped on, which is so cool for him.
Just talking about conditions, were you in Vers-sur-Marne, the Olympic course for next year for the juniors?
Yes.
What did you make of conditions that week? Because was it the same week as the Olympics will be?
No, much later. So the under 19s take place in August, and the Olympics will be in July. So it's a really variable course, and I wouldn't like to predict what it will be like in July of next year. I mean, for comparison, right, there was a para regatta that took place in Versailles just a few weeks before the under-19s in July, and the feedback from that was it was glorious. Sunshine, flat course, you know, favoured by many. It was a real hit with the para rows that went and raced there in the July. In the August for the under-19s, I want to say it was the Friday, maybe on before the weekend. There was racing schedule changes because of the weather that was coming in. But on one of the days, I think it was the Friday, I have seen possibly the worst conditions I've ever seen in my however many years I've been involved in rowing since 2006. It was hailing. It was I don't even know how many kilometer an hour, full tail crosswind. And these poor under-19 women's singles who were racing in I want to say it was the D or E final of the under-19 women's singles, came down the course as the heavens opened. It was lightning, it was hail, it was this huge crosswind. Just again, I think it was a little bit uncharacteristic for August, but it was quite scary. It was quite scary conditions, and we sort of got everyone off the course, called racing off. But yeah, it was definitely blustery, and it's really open. I think that's the other thing to like about Westman is there's the course which is on sort of one side of the lake, but then there's a whole open bit of water on the tower side. The tower's like a floating tower almost. There's a big gangway out to it because there's a whole other bit of water on the other side. So if there's a crosswind, there's actually loads of water for the waves to build up, which I think if the wind blows in the wrong direction can cause quite a bit of turbulent water. But if it blows in the right direction, and for most of the week it was a big sort of, as I say, cross tailwind, so it was actually helping the crews along. I think from memory, maybe I've got that wrong, but yeah, it was very, very, very variable, and I think you roll the dice, right? It's like most courses around the world, I think. On a bad day and it looks awful. We've seen Lucerne on a bad day, right? I don't know if you were there in 2021, just after COVID, but we had a day of racing cancelled just after FOQR because the conditions were so awful in Lucerne. So it happens everywhere. It's just the commonality and which direction the wind blows in most often, and hey, you've got to deal with whatever you've got to deal with on the day. So I'm sure plenty of people going out there. I think the Canadians have just been out for their camp straight after the Worlds. Many of the other nations will be doing the same to try and practice on the water.
Very, very interesting. Just before we move off races, I did ask Josh Butler, who's the former Westminster coach, now at Hampton. I said, "Oh, Josh, what's your race of the year?" And he kind of scratched his head, and he came up with the men's eights at Lucerne because he's Anglo-Kiwi, so Antipodean. He thought of the Australians beating the British, which interesting. Manuel has just World Cup 3, the women's 8, which we kind of mentioned.
We did kind of touch on it, didn't we, earlier, saying that was definitely for me one of my races of the year. I didn't want to sound too biased, but for me, that was phenomenal, seeing that charge that they conducted in that final 500 meters to perfection, right? It was sprint time to perfection, winning by this much, and if they'd have gone a stroke later, they might not have gotten to that line in time. Helped out by, I think, was it the dying Australians maybe who had gone out into the lead, and then sort of again quite characteristically, because they'd done it before, either previous rounds in the heats and actually previous races had died off, so they obviously knew that was an opportunity for them from the British team, but also to have the Canadians in the mix as well, who we all know that the Canadians, who were the big surprise at the Olympics in Tokyo, they've got something about them that means that you've always got to be careful of them, right?
Well, the thing around the women's 8, I was totally gobsmacked by that result because I'd commentated on the final of the Remenham at Henley, which is basically the women's 8. It's the grand for the women's 8s. and the British 8 were very poor. They got done by the Canadians. I pretty comprehensively, and it was kind of like, oh right, that's the speed they are. And then just a few days later, they completely turned it around in that final race. Didn't manage to do the same in the final of the Worlds, but they qualified. So, thumbs up for them. I guess that is probably, is it the second priority boat for Britain, the women's 8 after the women's 4?
Yes, I would say so, because the pair's doubling up, right? So
Yeah.
if you look at just the sweep side, the fact that we've got the pair in the 8 means that, the caliber, I suppose, we've really in reality only got 2 crews worth of women, and it's making up 3. So yeah, I guess you could say it's the second priority boat, alongside the pair who contain the same people. So I'm really intrigued as to see how that shapes up coming into this season. I know obviously they've just gone through a whole bunch of testing in December, second set of trials. But what do you do, right, with that women's 4, women's pair, women's 8 group? Because the 4 is like almost there, but not quite all the time, and they just keep getting beaten by somebody, whether it's the US, whether it's the Australians, whether it's the Romanians, whether it's Dutch. Like, there's someone that's always there, and that for me, as thinking about it, like, it's just slightly too uncomfortable, isn't it? Like, there are 3 crews there that have beaten us before. And what do you do to change that? Is that a change of personnel? Is that like a change completely? Do we just not prioritize the 4 and prioritize the pair, or something else instead? I think that's an interesting conundrum. And not one that we have to figure out, but Andrew Randall will have to have a look at.
Yeah, I think, and just about the Aussie women who medalled they got a bronze, didn't they, in Belgrade? There are questions being asked because the pair got the silver, when you kind of thought against the Dutch, the Australian pair, Morrison and McIntyre.
Did the Aussies not get a silver? Oh no! Did the Aussies not medal?
In the pair they got a silver.
Oh, in the pair. Sorry, I was going to say in the women's 4, I was like, it was
they didn't medal.
The Romanians and us, and I couldn't think that they got a medal. I don't think. But
no, well, we can come back to that. But there is a view that, pack the Aussie women's 8, put the pair in, like when they raced in 2019, and they had that really close race with the New Zealanders in Linz. Could be great.
I think there's a real opportunity in the women's 8, right? Because the Romanians are phenomenal, right? They're phenomenal. We've talked about their caliber across all of the events, but they double up. And that 8 was a doubled up set of the 4, the pair, a combination of lots of crews that had done lots of races. Whereas I think there's maybe a gap, a bit like the Canadians did in 2021, to sort of chuck all your eggs in one basket and really go for it, and come in from stage left with no one doubling up, all focus on one crew. They don't have to train 2 different boats throughout the season, and just take everyone out by surprise. And the Aussies could do that, I guess, with the people that they've got, because they've obviously got high caliber across the 4 and the pair and the 8 as well, right, that did medal, and it's almost there. Is it just that small adjustment of putting a few of those top people in that will elevate it again to being able to compete with the
Coach of the year was one thing we said we'd look at. There doesn't seem to be too much argument that Francesco Fossi, the Italian who coaches the Netherlands scullers, has had a phenomenal year. I kind of think, behind him it's Ilko Meerhorst who's doing the training program. And I know he's not doing coaching like Francesco. But who else is there that's been outstanding as a coach this year?
I mean, we've talked about the Romanians, and I suppose you have to sort of acknowledge Antonio Colomanici, right? And like what he does with that program, year after year. I think it's hard to ignore that he's had a big impact, and the results across the board always deliver for Romania when the time is right at the World Championships and at the Europeans. So, yeah, I think for me, that's more of a breadth, right? I think if we look at Francesco Fossi, I think was an excellent choice because he covered both breadth, multiple crews winning world championships, executing those 3 medals across the single, the double, and the quad, both breadth and performance. I think if you look at breadth, Colomanici has that breadth of program. I suppose if we talk about, a coach who coaches sort of one crew to an amazing performance. I suppose Ian Wright was on that list, right, for Switzerland. We've talked about kind of coming in and delivering and finding that combination, because that's part of the role of the coach, right? Is not only coaching the crew but finding the combination that can go on and seeing that potential. And I think that's something that Ian Wright's done really well with that. Yeah. And also with the rest, like he's formed the rest of the squad as well quite well between the men's 4. I think, was it the men's 4 or the men's squad? I can't remember which one actually performed quite well as well at the World. So
the men's 4 missed out on qualification by an incredible Romanian 4 sprint in the last. Yes. I want to say in the last 5 strokes that took them through the Swiss to get 7th place, and I think the men's quad qualified.
Yeah, so
he did a great job with that.
Yeah, so I mean, and then I'm just trying to think about other coaches. I think Michelle Darville was on the list as well, who, again, you look at the breadth of the Dutch women that you've got that are qualifying. I think they were just behind the Romanians in terms of number of women's crews qualified, and of course, like, outstanding performances from like Florine in that women's single. We've not even mentioned her, right? And I know she was up for Women's Crew of the Year, but when it comes to a standout blowaway performance, I think she's done it for 2 years on the trot now. You've got to acknowledge that as a very, very impressive feat to coach someone to that level in the single. So yeah, I think there's a few names there.
It's interesting that Florine is phenomenal and she still hasn't won Women's Crew of the Year.
Might be her year next year. We'll see.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I wondered about a mention for someone like Josie Verdonschot. I think it's a very difficult job to go to the States. I want to say he coached both the lightweight women's double and the heavyweight women's double, as well as being like overseeing the whole squad as I think he's performance director. I think the Dutch are kind of, we're doing all right without you, Josie. But he's obviously an amazing coach. He's got 2 Olympic gold medals that he's won, and I think he did coach both doubles at the Worlds. Like if you said who rows the best out of like all the crews at the World Championships, who would, if you could row like that crew, which crew would you choose? Go on, I'm asking you now.
You are asking me now. I was like, is this an open question? Is this a...
Well, I know my answer. Because I could tell you first, but I just thought I'd ask you first.
Well, it's not a question I was expecting. So who are you going to say? And give me a bit of time to think.
I would say the British men's 4.
Lovely shout. I mean, again, trying to avoid any form of bias, but I think so many people call out their technical model, their way of rowing, and I just don't know what they do in that middle part of the race.
Yeah,
that just seems to like accelerate the boat without what looks like any additional effort. It's maybe just one of the most. It's just one of the most effortless crews to watch, and I know it certainly probably doesn't feel like that for the 4 men in that crew, but it's so efficient, that it's just, it's stunning to watch. And I think that's a really good call out. And Manuel, again, my pick was going to be the Dutch men's quad, so you've beaten me to it, because that was what I was thinking of. But again, I think the Dutch men's quad, whoever they seem to put in it, and I think it makes a lot of sense, right? That you've got Francesco Fossi as coach of the year, and whoever he puts in the single, double, quad, the technical model plays out for them to be very successful. So it makes a lot of sense. But I think the quad as a boat, and bigger boats, I think, are just really nice to watch when they're going fast. Fast racing is always good. And I think the Dutch men's quad just exemplify, what a good fast boat looks like. Nice and sharp. But also, again, beautiful. I think the consistent factor is it looks effortless always. And I think that's the comparison between those two crews.
I've got a couple of things to throw at you.
Oh gosh, you keep doing this. I have not prepared for this.
I think best small nation performance, and by small nation I don't mean the Irish, because I don't call them a small nation anymore. I think they're kind of bigger. And I've got one in mind that isn't on the European continent.
Oh, isn't on the European continent.
Yeah. And they've raced outside of Europe, and they've raced in Europe. They've raced in Europe twice. And I kind of think, are they coming into their best sort of performances? And that's the quadruplets from Chile.
Lovely show. I thought you might have said Japan with like Ryuta Arakawa.
Oh, Ryuta, yeah, that's another one. We could say Ryuta Arakawa, couldn't we? Because he got that first medal in Varese. Yeah, that was right. Varese. But I kind of think, the Abraham sisters or quadruplet, I don't know, do we call them sisters or do we call them quadruplets?
No, I think they're sisters because, it's the two of them that have qualified their crew, right, for Paris. And so I would call them sisters. They are siblings.
And
maybe call them siblings, because then that's
siblings. That's
right?
It, yeah. Okay. But they won loads of medals in like the Latin American or the Pan Ams, or they came to Zagreb. They qualified their boat for the Olympics.
Yeah.
I kind of think, they got their brothers, if we ever get to mixed eights, which they had in is it in the Pan Ams they had mixed eights?
I don't know, actually. That's me. I didn't know that.
No, they had mixed eights in the Pan Ams, and I think all the quadruplets were in the Chilean eight.
Wow.
I really wish I could remember if they won, but I just can't remember.
And they're great personalities as well. The sisters, they gave a beautiful interview after they qualified the pair for Paris. It was really emotional and really lovely. So I think, that was a nice touch.
Yeah.
I thought another small nation. I'm listing them. Mexico qualifying the lightweight men's double.
Now, yes,
I think they have to be up there for one of the small nation performances of the world, because that was really cool to see them clinch that spot through that method.
Yeah, I think actually that's good. So Japan, Mexico, and Chile. I'm just thinking, have we missed anyone out in that one? We might come back to that, but I was trying to think of a nice way to say this, and I'm not sure there is a particularly nice way, but perhaps the most disappointing performance, or where a crew went a lot slower than we and they would have expected to go. And we've already mentioned the French lightweight men's double.
I mean, the French overall, I think, a reasonably disappointing regatta at the Worlds on the lead up to a home Olympics, would you say? I mean, not that France. Well, actually, that's maybe unfair to say. If I was about to say France never, sort of at the top of the medal tables, but they've had Andreas and Boucheron that have been, world champions, Olympic champions. They've had the lightweight women's double that have been Olympic silver medalists. We've had the lightweight men's double, like you say, gold medalists from Lucerne. So they are consistently on the podium. And you think into a home games, people step up, right? They step up that performance. Really challenging, I think, for the French. And there's a lot of work to do come FOQR.
I think one crew who didn't perform as I expected was the Australian men's four.
That was going to be my kind of, not glaringly obvious one, but it's almost a carbon copy of what we saw in Linz in 2019, right? That final, the previous Worlds to the Olympics, they absolutely fell off a cliff at Linz and came sixth, I think, in the final from memory, and just rode really poorly. And we've talked about how impressive the GB men's four are. If you compare them, they just rose so differently, but they were so much closer earlier in the season. So I don't know what happened between them.
Find that, and I think it's very when they raced the British in Varese, you thought, okay, they're just off the plane, they really look like they're trying hard, and the British were more smooth, as we've said, but it was a length or maybe just under a length, and the Australians got a silver, and they were the Australians were up at 38, 39, I guess, and then they came to Lucerne, and then they were like, I think I heard 34 at one point, and it was kind of like, oh, that's like a big difference. And then they rocked up at the Worlds, and I think, did they have Alex Purnell in the stroke seat?
Yeah, I think so, because they tried Purnell in the pair, right, at one point over the Olympiad, and then brought him back into the four. Maybe I'm making that up. It's so difficult to remember, isn't it? You're like, oh, I've watched these races, I remember. But yeah, I think they brought him back into the four for this season.
And so I think he was stroking at the start of the World Championships, and Alex Hill was in the bows. And then I don't know if they changed it for the final or the semi-final. I mean, I think they were fortunate they made the final, because, I think that small final would have been like, is this boat going to qualify? And I just, I don't really understand it. I'm not sure how much insight they'll have gained into that. I just wonder whether that four is going to emerge from the Australian summer as a crew to come to Europe, or whether it's going to be completely different. Maybe if they keep the four, maybe they'll put the coach of the Aussie 8, Mark Prater, who really has a great style with crews that he coaches, and give him a job. But I don't know what they're going to do.
And yeah, I think interesting. We're about to face into probably an Olympics not like we've seen for like at least two seasons, right? Because last Olympiad was so different, especially for the Antipodean nations that we saw come out on top across the board, and the fact that that's kind of dwindled since. I don't know how much that tells us about the level of training that they were able to accomplish whilst the rest of the world were in lockdown. I know that that's been talked about a lot, but also, like you said, I think we forget sometimes that the difference in seasons, because a lot of the rowing season is so Europe centric. The World Cups often take place 9 out of 10 times within Europe. The European Championships obviously has a heap of nations that comes to it, and they get that bit of racing against a lot of the fields that they're expecting come the World Championships. It's a pretty Eurocentric sport. So I think we forget that actually in New Zealand and Australia, it flips on its head, and now, they're training in their summer as we speak, right? It's December, and they're probably out, sort of getting ready, getting prepared, whilst the winter miles are happening elsewhere. So, yeah, we won't have seen an Olympiad like this since Rio, which is odd, right? And if we look back to Rio form and prior, the Australians in that men's four category, always ones to watch. So I think we'll see them bounce back, in all honesty.
Yeah.
My crew of that event actually was probably the USA men's four. If I'm really,
now that's a great shout.
Brilliant. What a brilliant crew to come out of the men's squad, because again, if you look elsewhere, the men's pair were great. They were a very impressive, again, out of nowhere crew, and we've already covered that topic of there's an opportunity there in the small boats for newly formed crews to develop loads and jump onto the podium. So I think that's a potential and one to watch. But I think the men's four for the US, they found something that really works there to get them that silver medal, and to see what they can this year.
A great job by Casey Galvanek, and I think Josie Verdonschot had quite a bit to do with that. Those guys rowing together, getting Liam Corrigan, who I think was in the fastest pair. Was he with Justin? Was it Justin Best? And anyway, they ended up in the four, and that's a great shout. I just wonder, this might be a bit cheeky, but in terms of crews in the Olympics, I think, I mean, some events will be open. I just wonder if we look at some events like women's doubles, is anyone going to beat the Romanians to Olympic gold?
I mean, I think for me, the only crew that could have done that were the Dutch, who were in the double last season. And then quad. Now, looking across, so who else medalled at the Worlds? Lithuania
and America, I want to say. Did they get the bronze?
Possibly the US crew. Yeah, difficult. I mean, I don't see the momentum stopping for the Romanian women's double.
No.
Like, I think that they are a masterclass in their own. So, yeah, I don't see it. I think if no one's done it already, like Lithuania, they're an experienced combination, right? Like, it's not like they're new.
Well, they've got one youngster and one really experienced athlete, Donata Caroline. Women's quads, I think, is open.
Oh, I'm so excited for the women's quad this year. I think it's going to be amazing. Like, China is surely going to bounce back. That's going to give them a huge heap of motivation to push back on. And I doubt it's complacency with the Chinese program, but certainly they don't race a whole heap, do they, throughout the year? And it'll give them a good benchmark. But that dominance has really been shelved, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Women's single, is anyone going to beat Florine?
So we've got Emma Twigg and Tara Rigney were the two other medalists.
And it's hard to see anyone coming in. Prakatson doesn't seem to have the same speed she had in the Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah, and I think who else we had in that? We had Caracola.
Oh yeah.
She'll find speed. Magdalena Lobnig, our Olympic bronze medalist. Now, she was in the single by accident almost and still managed to qualify it, given that she wasn't in the double, right, which was the plan. So what happens there, right? Does she stay in the single?
I know. Back to
the double? Or does she double up? Like, that's a whole problem for them. But I don't think so. I think Florine, I would say, deserves it, but I think given the season she's had, if she doesn't win, it will be heartbreaking. And I think it's one of those results I really hope does happen for her. I think she deserves it.
Although I think Rigney will be quicker next year. And Twig's supporters say if she's training full on, obviously she's got a family now. But women's pair, I think, I think that's still open. I don't think that there isn't a nailed-on pair.
I wasn't expecting the Dutch to win the women's pair. I don't know who I was. Maybe the Romanians. I think I was probably.
I thought the Australians would
the Australians
emerge.
Yeah, I
was,
think
yeah.
that's open. I would agree with you. I think that's a real mixed bag. I think the Dutch coming in and winning that was quite a surprise, really. So yeah.
Women's four's open, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's been interchangeable throughout the season, right? It's been
Yeah.
one apiece basically to everyone between the Romanians, the Dutch, the Brits, the Aussies, like the US. They've all been in there. So we basically had an A final, I think, at the Worlds where like anyone could have won it. I think really.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
then women's 8, I think, is open.
Yeah, and not that many to choose from, right? Like, was
No.
it the Italians that were quite far off the pace in that
Yeah.
position in the final? And I think everyone else is on form, on speed. So I think it is open and it will be close. But I don't think there's anyone else to add in. Whereas I think last time, so coming into Tokyo, we had China to add in, who ended up coming away with a bronze medal. They came through
Yeah.
FOQR. I don't know if we've got anyone coming in through FOQR this time
No.
around that could do it.
No, I think you're right.
I don't know.
Women's lightweight double. Are Craig and Grant going to win that?
Now, I
Is
think
it open?
I think so, but it's with the lightweight events. I just think it's so hard to be like, this is who's going to win.
Yeah.
Especially on the lightweight
Yeah.
women's side, because I think coming into Tokyo, you'd have maybe not anticipated the Italians, but it was so close across the board that it could have been anyone. Now it's been a lot more. They've been more consistently winning events this season and last season to anybody in the previous Olympic cycle. So
Yeah.
I'm more confident than I think I would have been to say them as favourites than I would have been to say anyone in the last Olympiad.
So men's double. Is anyone going to beat Broyne and Contuela?
Are we not doing men's single?
Yeah, we're going to go for that. I just got the men's double first on my list, so I don't.
Oh, fine. I thought we were going up through the boats. But,
yeah, okay. Let's do men's single then. Is anyone going to beat Ollie? That's open, that event. It's not like
and again,
Ollie's going to win.
Depends on the day, Crossy.
It does.
I think it depends on the day. You looked at Tokyo, you saw what happened. Paris, we've just talked about how changeable the conditions could be. If we get that beautiful flat day that they got at the Para Regatta, I think it's Zeidler every time. If we get what we just saw at Bled or what we saw at Paris at the under-19s, I think Tom McIntosh is excellent in the single, and I think so new to it as a sculler that there's still all of that like recency progress yet to come. Like, you have that, like, recency bias with training of like, you can't jump into a boat and do loads of improvements because you're new into it. I think we still get to see the best of Tom McIntosh and Simon van Dorp as well. Like, and I think I said this in the commentary in the final at the Worlds, like Simon van Dorp is probably one of the only people that like pound for pound and like centimeter for centimeter could match Seidler from a like levers point of view. So if he can utilize them well, and given all of that training in the beautiful Dutch weather, I think if there's a day for it, he could be there,
Yeah. So is anyone going to beat Broyne and Contuela in the men's doubles?
No, I don't think so. I think that now that the Croatians have jumped ship, I think the Dutch have got that painted orange.
I think the French, unless the French put on speed that they extra to what they had in Tokyo, I think even the French going, really, really well will have trouble beating that Dutch double. What about Dutch men's quad? Is anyone going to beat them?
Who are our options to beat the Dutch men's
Italy,
quad? The Italians and the
Poland,
and the Brits.
The Brits were fourth.
That's our top four. Then it was Switzerland and Germany, who did a very good job.
Germany did a great job.
Out of that, is anyone going to beat the Dutch? I think if anyone was going to, it would be the Italians.
Yeah,
I think they're my second bet because it was a shame what happened to them in Tokyo. And I think given the opportunity They do have the speed, they possess it, but they're a little bit hot and cold, like dependent on the regatta. You know, sometimes we see an amazing sort of turn of speed from them, and sometimes we just don't get that. We don't get the fireworks. And I think that we need more races between them and the Dutch, because they only got one really, which was the Worlds, in that combination that the Dutch brought to the Worlds. So I think we need to see more from them this season.
Yeah, I think you're right there about that. So men's pair is as open as can be.
The men's pair is going to be amazing. And
yeah, it is.
I think we won't see personnel change from the Swiss. I think the Swiss will stay, right, in their combination. As for everyone else, I mean, I think Ireland would be silly to change that combination, again, given it was so new. What happens with everyone else? And the Spanish, I think the Spanish will stay. But again, they were off the podium this time round, so who knows? What the Brits do with that men's pair? Do you think? Can you foresee any changes with Tom Kelly going into any other boat?
They want to do the pair.
Yeah,
I know they want to do the pair, and that's a lot of it. You know, you'll have to keep them out of it. And are they going to add anything to the 8? Not sure, and they're certainly not going to add anything to the 4. I think the pair is their best combination. So,
and there's kind of 2 prongs to it, right? With that, they want to do the pair, but if they see opportunity for a gold medal elsewhere, like, and they were given that opportunity, and it is put on the table in front of them, do you turn that down? And then from a selection point of view, do you disrupt the crews that are already winning golds at the World?
Yeah.
And to bring in 2 of your reasonably top guys that could is the underlying word, add more speed, but they might not, right? Like, as a combination, that men's 4, you wouldn't look at it on paper and go fastest in the world, but as a combination and as a 4 that's been coached so well, they just click and they just gel. So
yeah. British men's 4, is anyone going to beat them?
Who could?
Open. Well, you mentioned the Americans that you really liked as a crew. I'm not sure the Romanians are quite up there now, who got the silver in the last Olympics. I'm trying to think who got the bronze at this year's World Championships.
Oh, and this year's World Championships. Was it not New Zealand?
New Zealand. Oh, with 2 of the Olympic gold medalists on board. Yeah.
With I'm trying to think who was in that crew now. Matt. He's in the 8.
Yeah, I can't really remember. There were two gold medalists. I think Murray.
Yes.
One, and maybe McDonald. I can't remember the other lads.
That's who I'm thinking of, who came in the 8. You're right. Yeah, I think they were an excellent new crew. Yet another like brand new crew that outperformed expectation, I would say. Still got a bit to go. They really gave everyone a run for their money at Lucerne, if I remember correctly. In the time trial format, they were electric. They had some great speed in the time trial. Possible. I think if it's anyone, it'll probably be the Kiwis, actually.
Yeah, that's an interesting shout. Yeah, so that's kind of possibly a bit open, that event. We don't think that's necessarily nailed on. I think there'd be a lot of pressure on the British being the 4, even though, you know, they didn't win it in Tokyo. I think it'll be the British 4 thing again. It'd be interesting to see how they deal with that.
And will it be for all 4 of them their first Olympic Games? I think.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great stat. A great stat.
Which goes to show from the previous Olympics, right? Like just what that additional little word, Olympic Games rather than World Championships.
Yeah,
really play havoc on people.
Men's 8, Britain. Winners last 2 World Championships, didn't have it all their own way this season. Injuries are a big factor. When Elwes was out, they went slower at Lucerne, presumably against the Australians. So that's assuming it. I kind of think that event's an open event.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think they've had enough of a margin, apart from maybe very early in the season. In the more recent races where it's been like more showing of the form that we'd expect at the height of the season, it's never been so dominant that you could nail them on. I don't think.
Yeah.
And the Dutch could always get faster.
The Dutch could always get faster. And then finally, lightweight men's double. Can anyone beat the Irish?
I think so long as Paul's in the boat, like, it's going to win. And I honestly believe, and I think I've said this on Crossy's Corner before, I honestly think that Paul O'Donovan is one of the most impressive athletes. And Finton's amazing as well, right? Like, he was so young coming into that crew and has grown to row with Paul in quite an interesting style, right? They've not got the most sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Sort of smooth style. And conventional. That's the word they've not got the most
conventional.
But I just think Paul O'Donovan far out just performs every time it's asked of him. No matter how it's done, he just always seems to do it. He's just one of those athletes that whatever the challenge, whether he's jumping back in, having gone and collected his degree, and he's so chilled about it that I just can't see anyone.
Yeah, and I don't know, but I would imagine he's not doing the whole I'm a doctor thing for most of the season that he's done previously. I can't imagine him combining the Olympics with full-time medic. I know who's the lad from the Irish men's double? That's Philip Doyle. Yeah. I see lots of pictures of him being a doctor on Instagram, but I kind of imagine he'll do a bit of medicine, but most of the season, the run into Paris, he'll be full-time training. So that'll make him really difficult to beat.
Yeah, and I think the Swiss are my wild card here. I say wild card; they're not really a wild card anymore because they performed so well this season.
Yeah.
But between the three of them that are gunning for those 2 seats in the double, they'll find a combination that gets a podium almost certainly. But I think the Swiss just need to get that last 500 right.
Yeah.
Because holding at the moment. They're holding the Irish all the way until the final sprint. They're there. They're in it. They just need to find that sprint that who's the lad that got the gold at Lucerne in the lightweight men's single, who's the third guy going for that seat.
Oh yes. Who is
he has an amazing he had that amazing sprint in the lightweight men's single.
Stritzner.
Andre Stritzner. Yeah.
You pronounced it better than me.
Right?
Yeah.
So they've got it in them somewhere in the squad. They just need to find it against the Irish.
Yeah. And I'd say they were probably my young crew of the year, the Swiss lightweight men's double. And so they're going to be, a year more experienced. So maybe. But anyway,
what about the Para Cruise?
What about
the Para Cruise?
Yeah. So I think you'd think Para Men one single was closed off. I can't believe the Italian isn't going to have a shot at winning that.
I think Polinsky's like a phoenix, isn't he? No matter how many times Perini goes at him, he just seems to find some additional speed somewhere.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
I don't think that event's closed off. But Polyansky is exceptional. So nobody's going to beat Skarstein, in my opinion.
Although I must say, kudos, and I said this many times throughout this season, huge kudos to Moran Samuel, from Israel, who I think ran Birgit Skarstein to the closest margin we've had all season at the Lucerne exhibition.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
It was almost, I think it was a length or so, maybe within a length. Really led for a lot of the race, I think she did almost. In case, Birgit found a bit in the last few hundred meters, but I don't know. I feel like
Maybe that's more open.
Who knows?
It's those two, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Samuel
those
and,
two.
yeah,
It's
and
those two.
Scarcely. So then mixed PR2 double, that has to be open, doesn't it? After that race between the British and the Chinese.
And again, I think China back together and back on the scene. So they've had their own time away. The British a new combination. So they're almost at like they're both back into it through different avenues, back in the crew from one reason or another, whether it be a new combination or returning after a bit of a break. So yeah, I think both have development points to go. It's not like one's already there and the other's got opportunity to make huge gains. So yeah, I think that'll be really close.
And then there's the mixed PR3 mixed double scull, which is a new event in Paris that the Australians.
I think that's wide open, Crossy.
Oh, really?
I don't think we've seen enough of it yet to really. Again, I think it's like anytime there's a new event that comes in. Look at the women's 4, right?
Yeah.
Anytime an event is introduced into an Olympic or Paralympic Games, we see this like, huge margins at the start for one crew, world best times being set. And I think next year, you've got to remember that it's like almost half the time that it's existed as a Paralympic event has been like 1 year. Like it's only sort of come into the program as an event that people are prioritizing for 2 years. This was the second year.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that given another year, that's almost 50% more time that people are going to have in that crew to hone their skills and develop, and maybe even identify new talent, right? Like that's always the way with para too. Like we find new athletes, crews, and make them go even faster. So
and the PR3 mixed 4, can anyone stop Britain? Which I guess, no, you don't think so. I don't
think so. I mean, the US always give the Brits a good run for their money. I think the margin is closer this year, but the Brits are going faster. They set, again, another world best time. So it's not like the Brits are going slower. Everyone else is catching up to them. So I don't think that the US can make as many gains. They don't have many, if any, returners. Now, just trying to think. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think the British have still got the secret sauce there in that event.
Well, that's been a very interesting review of the Olympics and Paralympics, just at an early stage. Well, it is an early stage of the season. Yeah. Some events we think are closed off, some we think are open. I'm sure we're both looking forward to being part of the commentary team at various venues.
We'll see. Yeah. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
So that's been marvelous, Camilla. I'm so looking forward to that, and I think it's been great to review the season and to look forward to 2024. And I'm hoping for lots more of your company in that 2024 season. And there's a couple of messages here just before we go. Matthew Isaac said, Merry Christmas, Golden New Year, British Men's Suite cleaning up. Interesting. Our friends, Manuel Pitter, yeah, we talked a bit about that. The men's double. And Johnny Ambrose, very insightful. That's very nice. Thank you, Johnny. So a few comments there, but thank you for those. And we will end the live part of this interview now and say thanks very much and bye for now.
Thank you so much, everyone. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.